Welcome back to the show Science and Islam. As I mentioned before the break, I'll be delving into the world of Ibn Haythum, the great Muslim scientist. But before I do that, I'd like to go over the history of theory of light. Ancient Greek philosophers, and notice that we call them philosophers and not scientists, because scientists are those that carry experiments in order to verify their theories. But philosophers generally make theories purely based on observations. So these ancient Greek philosophers thought that the way the eyes saw the world around them was because there was something inside their eye called inner fire. And these inner fire created a form of light. And these light, as soon as you would open your eyes, would bounce off the objects around you and reflect back in your eyes. Later philosophers added that it wasn't just the eyes that generated a form of light, but all objects did from their surfaces. And somehow these two processes work together to create an image in our brain. Obviously, we now know that none of these theories are true, but it wasn't until Ibn Haythum came along did we really start to understand how vision and light worked. Al-Hasan ibn al-Haythum was born in the year 965 in Basra, which is modern-day Iraq. He was born at a time when the Abbasid family ruled the Islamic Empire. And another time, I'll go over how the Abbasid family in particular invested and put great emphasis in obtaining not just the Islamic and godly knowledge, but the knowledge of the entire world. So Al-Hasan ibn al-Haythum was born at a time when Al-Ma'mun, one of the Khalifa, established a unique institution in Baghdad, and he named it Baytul Hikmah, which means a house of wisdom. And this house of wisdom was unparalleled in its time. It wasn't just a place where different sciences were taught, and there were many sciences. You had the study of humanity and all different types of sciences like mathematics, astronomy, medicine, alchemy, chemistry, zoology even, geography. And all these places, it wasn't just a place where these lectures took place and people from all around the empire came to study. But this was a place where research took place. This was a place where people came to do experiments. There was also a department dedicated entirely to translation, basically called Department of Translation, where you would have all the books from different civilizations, from Indian to Persian to from Greek, all of these great works of scholars be translated into Arabic. And you had this position of being a translator was considered a very honorable one and certainly very rewardable. You were given your weight in gold for every book that you translated. So Ibn al-Haythum was born in this great era. And he wasn't just a great scientist, he was also a great mathematician and a great astronomer. Though he was curious about many things around him and studied a few different things, he was more curious about how the vision worked and how our eyes worked. He was curious how light traveled from one distance to another or how it reflected off different mirrors. He carried out experiments, which was quite unique for his time. Because up until then, experiments weren't necessarily carried out to test hypotheses or theories. They were just left at basic observations or measurements. So Ibn al-Haythum carefully designed his experiments, and he followed a particular method, a particular procedure to either confirm or reject the hypothesis. So we have a modern day method, which is observation. Then you have a hypothesis based on the observation. And then you test that theory or hypothesis, and you have a carefully designed experiment. Then you have results, and then you have a conclusion that either supports the hypothesis or doesn't support it. So he actually conducted all his experiments in that manner, or most of his experiments. He is known to have said, and I quote, "If learning the truth is a scientist's goal, then he must make himself the enemy of all that he reads," end quote. And by this he meant that one must test his theories, one must test his ideas, that he couldn't just simply read up about it or write about it. He has to have evidence that backs up his theory. So let's begin the story of Ibn Haythum and how he became the father of modern-day optics. As I mentioned earlier, he grew up at a time when schools and libraries were flourishing in the Muslim Empire. student had access to highly trained scholars coming in from all over the empire to teach a variety of subjects. Debates or discourses were common in institutions or in school, and sometimes they even took place in markets. So Ibn Haytham took advantage of all of this, and he had the access to one of the best institution and the best available teachers. Ibn Haytham, in particular, greatly benefited from being able to use the work of previous generations of scholars. His work had been translated into Arabic over the course of 200 to 300 years. As I mentioned earlier, Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, had a whole department dedicated to translation. It had gathered books from Indian civilization, from Persia to Greek, Latin, and translated them all into Arabic. So, for example, Ibn Haytham expounded on the work of Galen, who was an earlier Greek physician. And using that book as a basis and his own experiment that he conducted, he named the parts of the eye that we know today, such as the cornea, iris, or pupil. So Ibn Haytham rose to fame quite fast in Basra, where he was born, but his fame started to reach beyond that. He is known to have said, and I quote, "If I would be given the chance, I would implement a solution to regulate the Nile flooding." What he meant by that he'd build a dam over it, or a reservoir. His boasting eventually reached Al-Hakim, who was a Fatimid Khalifa in Egypt. So Al-Hakim invites him to Cairo. Ibn Haytham sets out for Cairo from Basra, quite confident he'll be able to carry out what he set out to do. It's only when he arrives in Cairo and sees this grandeur river does he start to doubt his ability. He sees these majestic grand structures on its bank, such as the pyramids left behind by the great Egyptian civilization. Does he realize that if the great architectures of the past couldn't tame this river, couldn't build a dam or a reservoir, he certainly wouldn't be able to do it either. Now here's where the story gets interesting, because now he's sort of stuck. I mean, Al-Hakim wasn't known to be a very patient or understanding kind of man. He knew that if he went up to the Khalifa and told him, "Well, I'm sorry, I know you brought me all the way here to carry out this project and you were looking forward to it. Now I haven't got a clue how to do it." So Ibn Haytham comes up with this idea. He pretends to be mad. He realizes that the Khalifa wouldn't put him to death for being mad. So he goes up to the court of Al-Hakim and starts rambling on, making it seem like that, whatever his past boasting was, it was just rambling of a madman. He wasn't really serious. Al-Hakim actually believed him and believes that he was so mad that he might hurt himself or others. So he sentenced him to something that what we call today protective custody. It's sort of similar to a house arrest. So he was basically sentenced to house arrest for this to ensure his own safety and that of others. Now, this was really hard for Ibn Haytham. I mean, imagine being a genius, and imagine being a genius scientist, but yet be treated entirely opposite, like a madman. And not only that, he had to carry on that persona just to keep his life, just to have his life still be spared. So that itself is a very hard thing to bear. But not only that, he came from a bustling city of Basra, where he was part of many social circles, where he would give lectures and he had students. He was well known and well respected for his great knowledge. He would have debates and discourses with different scholars, in Bayt al-Hikmah and different places. He was somebody who was constantly busy and immersed in knowledge, carrying out experimentations, writing books, reading books in libraries. Now he was locked in this dark room alone, not even in Basra, in a totally different city, entirely alien to him. But it was at this bleakest moment in his life, at this lowest point in his life, does he make a dazzling discovery that today made him the scientist that we remember centuries later. One day, Ibn Haythum noticed that light coming through a small pinhole. It was like a small wall in the hole. And he noticed light was coming through from outside. He was sitting in a dark room and sun was up outside. And he noticed as this light came through and hit the opposing wall. He got up to look into the wall and he noticed something amazing. He noticed that there was actual picture of what was outside. So there was, let's just say, pretend that there was, a minaret outside or trees outside. There was an exact replica of what was outside onto this wall, except that it was upside down. And this is when he realized the light must travel in a straight line, because the only way for a light to produce an upside down image is that if sun rays hit, let's just say, the top of the minaret or top of the tree, when they're reflected back off to another wall, opposing wall, it would hit the bottom of that wall. So it would create an upside down image. That is when he also concluded that the eyes must see everything around us upside down, but it is our brain that processes that image and turns it right side up. So using this phenomena that Ibn Haytham has just discovered, he starts to experiment in what he calls Bayt al-Muslm, which means a dark room. Bayt al-Muslm is later translated to camera obscura in Latin. What's interesting is that the word camera comes from the Arabic word qamara. Qamara means a dark room in Arabic. And actually to this day, in Urdu language, for example, for those of you who speak Urdu, know that the word qamara means a room. So we've been using this word for the last century or so, essentially to mean, this device that we use to capture images, the word camera. And we never think about that this word actually comes, from the Arabic language. Because the first person to have noticed this ability to capture an image was a Muslim. What's also amazing is what Ibn Haytham derived from this. He reasoned that the pinhole in the dark room is like our eye, and the wall is like the back of the eye. And that our brain comes in and then carries out the task of turning the image right side up. Now imagine if your brain didn't do that. You would see everything upside down. Actually, there are some rare brain disorders where people have to live their entire life looking at the world upside down. And even recently, the doctors have just discovered that babies, when they're just born and up to a few days old, see the world upside down until their brain develops enough to turn the image right side up. So Ibn Haytham wrote about this discovery and explained how the eye and the vision worked using many other experiments. He used mirrors, different types of mirror, concave mirror, convex mirrors, and he used different types of light. He changed the size of the pinhole, making it bigger or smaller, or changed the size of the room. And he wrote an entire book on it called Kitab al-Manazir, which translates to Book of Optics. And it is this Book of Optics that made him the father of modern day optics. His book was eventually translated to Latin and was used as a standard book on vision for centuries, up until the 18th century. Actually, one of the great painters, I don't know if many of the listeners would know, his name is Johannes Vermeer. He was a Dutch painter in the late 17th century. And he was nicknamed the Master of Light. And one of the reasons was that he would use camera obscura to capture the images and then paint on them. He would use a mirror in the middle to somehow reflect it off to another wall and then paint on them. And to be honest, essentially that is how a camera works. Camera works exactly the same way, in the same principle. It's a bit more complicated. You got the lenses in there, you got different things going on in there, but essentially the principle is the same. And this is why we still use the word camera, coming from camera. This is one of the classic, this camera obscura is one of the classic experiments kids in science class still carry out. And actually, I would suggest parents to do this with their kids, maybe perhaps this weekend or during the holidays. Look up how you can make a camera obscura. And it's actually quite easy and simple. Really, all you need is like a shoebox. So instead of capturing the image in a dark room, which could be quite hard because you have to have a room that has no other hole except that pinhole, and that really wouldn't be a very hard thing to do. So all you need is really some tape and a shoebox. And you can tell them about Ibn Haytham, how today we wouldn't have the camera without his work. And certainly we wouldn't even have Snapchat or Instagram, which would be a horrible disappointment to, all of these young kids. But we owe it to Ibn Haytham. Recently, there's a global effort to start to recognize the contribution the Muslim world has made to the civilization, to the advancement of science, language, art, culture. King Abdulaziz Center for Science, in conjunction with United Nations, has started a global campaign called 1001 Inventions to educate the world about, those 1,000 years of amnesia everyone seems to have. I actually went to one of their centers in Dubai, and it is really a fascinating one. Recently, they've released a film on Ibn Haytham. It's an animated film for kids on his story, and it's narrated by the famous Egyptian actor Omar Sharif. So here's the trailer.
If learning the truth is the scientist's goal, then he must make himself the enemy of all that he reads. In the words of Isaac Newton, if I have seen further, it is because I stand on the shoulders of giants. I wonder who those giants were. The quest of every true scientist to truly understand our world.
It sounds great, but it looks so much better. So I would suggest that you visit the website, www.1001inventions.com. So it's 1001inventions.com to actually see the trailer of the film and some of the other great projects they're working on. I'm hoping to get the film, a screening of the film in Birmingham. So hopefully it works out. I think it'd be great for young students or young children who are passionate about science in particular. So please follow up on this show to find out the details. So anyway, why is it important in the first place to learn about Ibn Haytham or other scholars from the past? I mean, this is something I know our kids could ask us, like, why do I need to know this? But as I mentioned earlier in the show, it's part of our heritage. We have to tell them this is part of who you are today. This is part of your identity, especially with a lot of youth when they're so conflicted about their identity and they don't know where they belong. Knowing where we've come from and knowing the differences that we made. We are our predecessors. We're great leaders of empires, and the differences they've made today. I mean, today, to tell a child today that the word camera comes from the Arabic word and this is how it's connected to Ibn Haytham will make a huge difference in their identity, and they're confident to be Muslims. And they're living at a time, and we are too, living at a time where we're constantly under attack in media. We're portrayed as always not assimilating enough, not integrating enough, or contributing enough. We're constantly portrayed as some sort of burden in the society. But modern day Britain, or actually the world, wouldn't be the same without the 1,000 years of Islamic golden age that propelled this world forward. So, and it wasn't just in the past. The Muslims today are making many fields are making huge differences and contributions. You have Muslim researchers, Muslim inventors, and inshallah, that's what I'm hoping. And the next few shows that I wouldn't be just going over the previous scholars or the scientists from the past, but inshallah, I'm hoping to get guests who are making a difference today, who are researchers or are coming up with, inventions. I know a brother who hopefully will be part of the show, coming from, he lives in America, and he's currently working on right now different types of solar cells, the cells that capture energy, solar energy, and convert it into different form of energy. So I'm hoping to have him on the show in the next few weeks, inshallah. But you know what? That's not actually my only reason either. Just to learn about the heritage and our past for the show. I believe in order to learn about our Creator, about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we must learn about His creation. Some people question that if Islam or and science are compatible. They assumed that just how Christianity impeded the progression of science, which led to, of course, eventually people separating religion and science, that Islam would have the same impact on science. But instead of Islam impeding the way of discovery, it encourages it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أَفَلَا يَنظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Then do they not look at the camels, how they are created? وَإِلَى السَّمَاءِ كَيْفَ رُفِعَتْ. And at the sky, how it is raised. وَإِلَى الْجِبَالِ كَيْفَ نُصِبَتْ. And at the mountains, how they are created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, how? كَيْفَ. This is one way to know more about Allah and to be in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ability and His design, His creation, is to know how He has made these things. Numerous times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points to His creation so that we may ponder over it and reflect upon it to know more about His presence. For example, Allah says in Surah Rahman, مَرَجَ الْبَحْرَيْنِ يَلْتَقِيَانِ, that He released the two seas meeting side by side. بَيْنَهُمَا بَرْزَخٌ لَا يَبْغِيَانِ, between them is a barrier, so neither of them transgress. There's actually videos of these two seas meeting. One is a sweet sea and one is a salty. And yet, even though you cannot see there's a barrier, but there is a barrier. Somehow they do not cross over one into another. So studying the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bound to, and studying the sciences is bound to increase your love and understanding of Allah. I remember some of the lectures at my university would increase my iman more than khutbahs or Islamic lectures I would listen to. I remember once at my first year chemistry course, we were studying, it was like a lecture, I remember, we were studying the structure of water. Now, this might be slightly complicated for those who are not so fond of chemistry, but I'm sure most of you can follow along. So water, I think most of you know, is made of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen, so H2O. So an oxygen has 2 lone pairs of electrons. As a structure, it has what we call a tetrahedral formation, which means a central atom, in this case oxygen, is surrounded by 4 other constituents. So in this case, 2 hydrogen atoms and 2 lone pair of electrons. So it sort of looks like a triangular pyramid. So if you were to be able to somehow capture how water, each molecule of water looks like, it looked like some sort of triangular pyramid. Now the angles between each bond, in a tetrahedral is typical 109.5. For example, in CH4, which is methane. So it's just, because it has central atom, which is carbon, surrounded by 4, it has a 109.5 degree angle between each bond. But because of oxygen's lone pair, the angles are somehow, instead of 109.5, they are 104.5. And I actually remember exactly what my professor said. She said, it is this little difference in bond angle that allows marine life to exist. I mean, I was entirely perplexed, how? And inshallah, so I'll talk about this next time. I'll go over the next show what she meant by that. Because I remember by the end of it, I actually had tears in my eyes because I was baffled how anyone could possibly know all of this and deny the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How is it that subhanAllah, the laws of chemistry, biology, physics, all work in conjunction with one another, not contradicting at all, and creating if they wanted, they could have contradicted them all and would have created a giant mess of chaos. So For next time, if you like to learn a bit of history, bit of science and Islam, then tune in next time. Next week we'll have a guest, Dr. Layla, who has a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and has completed a PhD degree in toxicology. And we'll discuss the world of biochemistry and medicine. We'll be talking about Ibn Sina, for example, who made great strides in the field of medicine, and whose book, Qanun al-Tib, the canon of medicine, was a standard text in the field for many centuries, and it still is used today in some parts of the world. So Jazakallahu khairan for listening, and inshallah tune in next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.